We stay with this story and speak to our UN Correspondent Sherwin Bryce-Pease, who joins us live now from New York. Sherwin, what has been the reaction from the United Nations?
Bongiwe, we certainly are waiting for that reaction. The Secretary General just moments ago speaking at a International Holocaust Remembrance Day event in the UN General Assembly. The Israeli ambassador to the UN, Gilad Erdan, currently speaking in the Assembly. So they've been preoccupied with other events here, but we are expecting certainly to hear from the Secretary General. His spokesperson has said he will speak around noon local time, which is around 7 p.m. South African time, but that could happen within that window on either side of the hour. We, of course, are also wanting to hear from the United States. The White House has a press briefing at around 8 p.m. South African time, so we'll certainly be monitoring that and monitoring reactions certainly from those who have professed, that have made their detracting comments in terms of South Africa's case very well known. Canada, for example, Austria, for example, a number of European and Western states are certainly waiting to hear from them. I can tell you that Algeria, which is currently a non-permanent member of the UN Security Council, has, under instruction from President Abdelmadjid Tebboune, requested a meeting of the UN Security Council as soon as possible in order, Bongiwe, let me read the language to you, in order to activate the ruling of the International Court of Justice on provisional measures imposed on the Israeli occupation. So the Algerians here seeking to have the UN Security Council weigh in on the provisional measures that have been ordered by the ICJ. If that were to amount to some sort of resolution, the big question is, will the United States accede to endorsing such a request? Will you have unanimity within the 15-member United Nations Security Council? That certainly seems unlikely from off the bat here. I can also tell you that the ICJ, in this case, not dismissing Israel's request for the entire case to be thrown out, saying that the allegations made by South Africa is capable of falling within the scope of the Genocide Convention. So not articulating itself on the merits of the broader question as to whether Israel is or is not committing genocide, but saying that the claims made by South Africa are capable of falling within the scope of the Genocide Convention. We have, of course, since heard from the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who said Israel was committed to international law, but that it would continue to do what was necessary to defend the country and its people. The defense minister of Israel, Yoav Gallant, issued the following statement. The ICJ, he says, added sin to the crime committed by Hamas against the Jewish people on October 7th when it did not reject the petition outright. Where whoever, he says, is looking for justice will not find it in the leather chairs in The Hague, but in the Hamas tunnels in Gaza where 136 abductees are kept. The state of Palestine, Riyad al-Maliki, the foreign minister of the state of Palestine, released a video on social media a short time ago in which he welcomed the provisional measures ordered by the ICJ, ruling in favor of what he says is humanity and international law. Bongiwe, the ICJ order, he says, is an important reminder that no state is above the law, and that Palestine reaffirms its eternal gratitude to the people and government of South Africa. So just a smattering of response from around the world. We are, of course, waiting for key stakeholders, including the Secretary General, and perhaps what the White House will say about these provisional measures handed down by the ICJ in The Hague earlier today, Bongiwe.
And Sherwin, given the recent developments, it'll be interesting to even hear, as you say, how the White House responds to this, but also when one listens to that order as it was handed down today. I mean, listening to some of what was coming out from the Genocide Convention, for example, you look at Article 2 and 3 forming part as well of what the court had to say, and the responsibility of the member states in that particular regard to also uphold these obligations.
So what the court didn't say, right, and what the court did not pronounce itself on here was whether Israel is committing genocide or not. It also did not order what South Africa was seeking, and that was an immediate and a humanitarian ceasefire. So that would be lamentable to UN officials, including the Secretary General. That has made that a key demand of the narrative you hear from the United Nations in terms of the humanitarian catastrophe that is unfolding in Gaza and the lack of adequate resources that are being deployed in Gaza to meet the commensurate need in terms of the humanitarian needs that so many Palestinians in the enclave are facing. 2.3 million people. You hear about figures between 80 and 90% displaced. You hear about above 60% of residential buildings that have been destroyed, and that speaks to the catastrophe here. So what the court has done has been very narrow, and its narrow order is based on two parties having a dispute in relation to the Genocide Convention of 1948. And so what the court has said is that the State of Israel shall, according to its obligations under the Genocide Convention, take all power to prevent all acts of genocide in terms of Article 2 and 3 of the Convention. What does Article 2 of the Convention say? It talks about acts committed with intent to destroy in whole or in part a national, ethnic, racial or religious group by killing members of the group, causing serious bodily or mental harm to the group, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about the physical destruction of that group in whole or in part, imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group, forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. So very specifically in terms of not just some broad vacuous notion of international law, but essentially what Israel has already signed up to in terms of it being a signatory to the Genocide Convention of 1948. The court is saying, do what you said you would do when you signed the treaty in 1948. And those are the stipulations that the court is seeking to address here. Now, Lady Pandor, South Africa's International Relations and Cooperation Minister, outside the Peace Palace on the steps of the court at The Hague, saying that she does not believe, despite the fact that there's no language around the cessation of hostilities in the court's order, how do you implement the provisional measures if there is no ceasefire in Gaza? How are humanitarian aid workers going to be able to upscale their humanitarian aid and the restoration of basic services into Gaza if bombs are still dropping all around them? So she believes that even though there is not language speaking to a cessation or an immediate ceasefire, that it's impossible to deliver on the provisional measures were Israel not to, at the very least, have a humanitarian pause so that the provisional measures can be implemented moving forward. But implementation is the key. Will it come from the State of Israel? Cyril Ramaphosa, South Africa's president, believes all states that are parties to the Genocide Convention must now act in accordance with the provisional measures handed down by the court.
Sherwin, thank you so much for that update. And let's see then what becomes their reaction as the day progresses. That is UN Correspondent Sherwin Bryce-Pease, who's been watching developments there at the court and joining us from New York.